Christmas is canceled for you, my dad announced at the family gathering. All because I refused to co-sign a $50,000 loan for my sister's boutique. I didn't argue, just nodded, took a deep breath, and left the room. The next morning, they woke up to frozen accounts, locked credit cards, and when my father said, "Christmas is canceled for you," it felt like one of those over-the-top moments you see in movies. The room had fallen silent, just the faint hum of the central heating and the soft clink of my sister's perfectly manicured fingernails on her glass. I didn't argue. I didn't try to reason with him or even ask for an explanation. I just nodded, took a deep breath, and walked out of the room, letting the heavy oak door swing shut behind me. It all started when Khloe decided she needed another $50,000 for her latest boutique project. It was going to be her big break, an exclusive high-end fashion line she'd been hyping for months. She wanted me to co-sign the loan because her credit was a mess and my father's finances were too tied up in other investments to take on any more risk. I had my doubts, not just about the deal, which felt like another one of her whims, but about getting involved in her financial mess. You see, Khloe had always been the star of our family. The perfect daughter with her blonde waves, pearly smile, and the kind of charm that could bend people to her will. Dad loved that about her, worshipped it. He used to say she reminded him of my mother in her prime back before the divorce when they were the perfect power couple. Me, I was the practical one, the guy who took the reliable engineering job instead of chasing flashy dreams. That had always been my role, the steady hand in the family, the problem solver. And I'd had enough. I walked out that night, the echoes of their murmured voices following me down the hall, but my mind was already working. If they wanted to play this game, I'd show them how high the stakes could get. They'd always underestimated me, assuming my calm, logical approach made me passive. But I'd been paying attention. I knew the structure of our family finances better than anyone. The next morning, I worked quickly. I logged into the joint accounts I'd helped set up years ago when Dad still trusted me enough to handle the paperwork for his various ventures. I froze the main checking account, locked down the investment portfolios, and redirected some automatic withdrawals to my own emergency fund. I even froze the credit cards I knew Khloe relied on for her lavish spending. It was all perfectly legal. I was a partner and shareholder in some of these accounts, and I had every right to protect my investments. At 9 a.m., my phone started buzzing. Khloe, as expected, was the first. A rapid-fire series of angry texts demanding to know why her card was being declined at her favorite brunch spot. I could almost picture her sitting in an overpriced cafe, eyes widening as the waitress leaned over to discreetly inform her that her payment hadn't gone through. I ignored her. Then my father arrived, less frantic, more controlled, but with an edge I hadn't heard in years. He called twice, then switched to text. "We need to talk. Call me." I didn't. I let the messages pile up, the notifications light up my screen as I sat in my small, impeccably organized apartment, sipping my morning coffee. I didn't want to ruin them, just force them to stop seeing me as their safety net. To make them realize that I wasn't just an accessory to their perfect little family machine. I took a deep breath and watched the sun break through the morning mist outside my window. Felt good. Maybe a little too good if I was honest. I crossed the line and I knew it. But part of me wanted to see how far they'd go to pull me back. I had a feeling this was just the beginning. By the afternoon, my phone had gone silent. No more texts. No missed calls. Just an eerie, heavy silence that I knew meant my father was planning his next move. He never reacted out of pure emotion. That was Khloe's specialty. Dad preferred to hit back after he'd had time to plan his counterattack, and I'd just given him all the motivation he needed. That night, I got a call from my aunt, Linda. She rarely called me, so I answered right away. Her voice was firm, controlled, the kind of tone people use when they're trying to keep their own anger in check. She didn't waste time on small talk. "Ethan, I just got a call from your dad. He says you're acting out and have some kind of vendetta against the family. He's spinning this story about you sabotaging Khloe's business and putting everyone in financial jeopardy. He even implied that you might be unstable." I closed my eyes, feeling the frustration in my chest. I should have seen this coming. He was already trying to isolate me, to paint me as the unreasonable one. It was a classic move. Turn the family against the black sheep, make them question my stability. Linda, that's not what's happening. He's just mad that I wouldn't sign off on another one of Khloe's money pits. She hesitated, her silence long enough to let me know she was weighing her words. You know how he is. Just be careful, Ethan. He won't take this lightly. I thanked her for the warning, but by the time I hung up, my mind was already racing. If my father was trying to make me look unstable, it meant he was serious about turning the rest of the family against me. And he was good at it. The man had spent decades mastering the art of manipulation. The next day, I got a text from my cousin Mark. Hey man, just checking in. Heard some stuff from your dad. You good? I just replied, yeah, all good. Just a family thing. But it wasn't just a family thing. I knew it. My father had crossed the line by trying to smear my name, and I couldn't just sit back and let him spin his version of the story. I started making phone calls, quietly reaching out to a few family members I still trusted. I explained what was really going on, that I wasn't some unstable, reckless son trying to burn down the family, but a guy who had finally had enough of being taken for granted. It was exhausting playing this quiet game of damage control while trying to keep my own life in order. I still had my job, my friends, my own goals, and I refused to let my father's plans drag me down. But the more I pushed back, the clearer it became that it wasn't just about the money or the boutique anymore. He wanted control. Complete, unquestioning control. That night, I finally broke my silence and sent my father a single text message. I know what you're doing. It won't work. No reply, just the same heavy silence. But I knew him well enough to understand that silence was never a good sign. I spent the next few days preparing, quietly, moving my own funds into safer, more private accounts and severing a few remaining financial ties I had to the family business. I started documenting everything, screenshots, emails, account balances, anything I might need if things got ugly. I could feel the tension building like the low rumble of an approaching storm. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. My father wasn't going to stop until he felt like he had me back under his control or until he pushed me out of the way completely. Either way, I had to be ready. By the end of the week, the whispers had spread. I could feel it in the way my extended family began to treat me. Their voices a little more strained when we spoke, their messages a little shorter. My Aunt Linda, who had first warned me, had gone silent, and my cousin Mark had stopped responding to my texts altogether. My father's plan to isolate me was already in motion. Then came the first real blow. I got a call from my landlord, a no-nonsense guy named Pete, who rarely bothered me unless something was seriously wrong. Hey, Ethan, he said, his voice uncharacteristically tense. I just got a call from someone claiming to be your dad. Said he was worried about you, that you might be in financial trouble. He wanted to confirm that you were still paying your rent on time. I gripped the edge of my desk, feeling the anger flare in my chest. What did you tell him? Pete hesitated. Look, man, I just told him that you've always been a solid tenant, never missed a payment. But he kept pushing, asking if you'd been acting weird lately, or if you'd mentioned any financial problems. It was weird. I thanked Pete for the warning, but as I hung up, I realized this was worse than I thought. My father wasn't just trying to undermine me and the family. He was trying to destabilize my entire life, to plant seeds of doubt, to make people question my reliability. A few hours later, I received another call, this time from my boss. It was short, professional, but the undertone was unmistakable. Ethan, just wanted to check in. We got a strange call from someone claiming to be a concerned family member. I don't know what's going on, but I wanted to give you a heads up. Are you all right? I felt the ground shift beneath me. My father was trying to corner me, to make me look unstable, unreliable, to cut me off from my support network. It was a methodical, calculated attack, and I had to admit I hadn't expected him to strike so quickly. But two can play at that game. That night, I sat down at my kitchen table surrounded by a mess of bank statements, contracts, and printouts. I opened my laptop and began drafting a detailed letter to my family. Not an angry, emotional rant, but a clear, factual account of what had really happened. I laid out the financial history, the loans, the failed businesses, the manipulation, everything I'd quietly tolerated over the years. I included copies of my co-signing refusals, proof of Khloe's previous bankruptcies, and a record of the money I'd personally invested in her businesses without ever getting paid back. Then I went a step further. I sent copies of this letter to my aunts, uncles, and cousins, the people I knew my father would eventually reach out to in his campaign against me. I included screenshots of his most recent attempts to interfere with my finances, and a carefully worded message about why I had taken the steps I had. I wanted them to see the full picture before he twisted it any further. When I hit send, I felt a strange mixture of relief and fear. I just declared open war on my father's story, and I had no idea how it would play out. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a single text from my father. "You made a mistake. Don't make it worse for yourself." I let out a slow breath, the faintest hint of a smile on my lips. He was on the ropes now, but I knew better than to underestimate him. This was far from over. For a few days it was quiet. Too quiet. My dad's text about making a mistake had hung in the air like a distant thunderclap. But nothing happened. No more surprise calls from my boss. No more strange messages from my landlord. I almost started to think he backed off, maybe realizing he pushed too hard. Then one morning, I woke up to find my personal bank account frozen. No warning, no explanation, just a blunt error message on my banking application. I sat up, heart pounding, and immediately called the bank. After a long wait, I finally got through to a customer service representative. "Sir, I see here that a family member has reported potential fraud on the account. Due to recent large transactions, we had to temporarily freeze the account for security purposes." My jaw clenched. I knew exactly who had called. My father was trying to strangle my finances, cut me off from my own money. I spent the next hour untangling the mess, sending in verification documents, and confirming my identity. It was a frustrating, humiliating process. But by the end of the day, I had the account unfrozen. But this move made one thing clear. My father wasn't backing down. He was escalating, pushing me harder, and I realized I had to hit back in a way that really hurt. Not just a financial punch, but something that cut deeper. That's when I remembered the boutique. Khloe's new business wasn't just another failing boutique. It was her image, her identity, the one thing she could cling to as proof that she was more than just our father's spoiled princess. I still had access to some of the shared business documents from when she'd first pitched the idea to our father. Late that night, I pulled them up, sifting through contracts and financial projections. That's when I found it a glaring error. Khloe had used our father's personal property as collateral for the lease on her boutique, something I doubted he'd ever noticed in his rush to move the project forward. If I played this right, I could land a blow that would hurt both of them. I made a few phone calls and called in a favor from an old friend who worked in commercial real estate. By the end of the week, I'd quietly purchased the lease on the space Khloe had chosen for her flagship store. It wasn't cheap, but I had enough in my emergency fund to make it work. Legally, I now had control over the physical location of her precious boutique. And without a secure lease, her business plan would collapse. 2 days later, I walked past the boutique. It was a flashy modern space with floor-to-ceiling windows, racks of overpriced dresses, and a neon sign with her name spelled out in loopy script. Khloe was there pacing the counter, her phone pressed to her ear, her eyes wide with panic. I watched from across the street as she gestured wildly, her voice muffled through the glass. She was learning the hard way that all her flashy marketing and Instagram followers meant nothing without a safe place to sell her overpriced dreams. That night, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't my dad. It was Khloe. Her message was short and angry. "What the hell did you do? Fix this, Ethan." I leaned back in my chair and let out a slow, satisfied breath. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had the upper hand. My father had underestimated me and my sister had ignored me. Now, they were both paying the price, but I knew that this victory wouldn't last. My father was a stubborn, calculating man, and I could feel the storm gathering. I'd hit a nerve, and the real battle was just beginning. I knew I'd hit them where it would hurt. Khloe's panic texts became a daily occurrence, alternating between demands and desperate pleas. She'd even tried to show up at my apartment once, banging on my door and screaming about how I'd ruined everything. I watched her through the peephole, her perfect hair slightly frazzled, her carefully curated Instagram persona cracking under the pressure. I didn't answer. My dad, though, he went silent again, and that made me nervous. Then 2 days later, I got a call from my aunt, Linda. I almost didn't answer it, but something told me to hear her out. "Ethan," she said, her voice softer than usual, "I had a long talk with your dad. He's different lately. I think you really shook him up." I felt a flicker of satisfaction but kept my tone neutral. "How so?" "He's been talking about how he's just trying to protect the family, how you're throwing everything away out of spite. But then he said something strange. He hinted that he's willing to cut you off completely, not just financially, but from the family, like permanently." I paused, gripping the phone a little tighter. "What does that even mean?" "I'm not sure," she admitted, "but I have a feeling he's planning something drastic. Just be careful." I thanked her and hung up, my mind racing. My father was a control freak, but this felt different, desperate, even. Whatever he had planned, it felt final. The next morning, I received an email from the family's legal team. It was a carefully worded, coldly professional letter stating that I was being formally removed as a beneficiary of the family trust. My father had cut me out, legally severing any remaining financial ties. I was effectively disowned. For a long moment, I just sat there staring at the screen, feeling a mixture of relief and anger. He'd really done it. He'd chosen to protect Khloe's fragile little empire over his relationship with his only son. But then, as I sat there in the morning light, a strange calm came over me. This was what I had wanted, wasn't it? To be free of their manipulations, their demands, their constant sense of entitlement. They'd drawn the line, and I was finally on the other side. Later that afternoon, I received a final text from my father. "I hope you're happy, Ethan. You're no longer my son." I read it twice, then deleted it without replying. I called Aunt Linda that night and thanked her for everything. She promised to keep in touch, and I believed her. A few other relatives reached out as well, quietly offering their support. They'd seen enough of my father's power plays over the years to understand what had really happened. As I hung up the phone and looked out over the city from my small, cluttered apartment, I felt a strange sense of peace. I had lost the family, but I had gained something I hadn't felt in years: freedom. In the weeks that followed my father's last message, the chaos slowly subsided. My phone stopped buzzing with his thinly veiled threats and Khloe's desperate pleas. I no longer had to worry about surprise calls from my landlord or uncomfortable conversations with my boss. For the first time in years, my life felt like my own. Then one morning I received a letter. Not an email, not a text, but a real handwritten letter in a thick cream-colored envelope with the family crest stamped on the back. It felt like something out of a courtroom drama. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The handwriting was my father's, bold, precise, the kind of writing that demands attention. "Ethan, you have made your decision. Consider this my final word on the matter. You are hereby removed as a beneficiary from all remaining family trusts and businesses. You will receive no further financial support, directly or indirectly, from this family. As of this moment, you are no longer part of our legacy. Do not contact me again. John." I read it twice, then put it on my kitchen table. I should have felt something: anger perhaps, or at least the dull ache of regret, but instead I felt a strange growing calm. I realized this was the moment I'd been pushing for all along. He'd cut me off, severed the last thread that bound me to his world of control and manipulation. I put the letter back in its envelope and set it aside. I wasn't going to frame it or keep it as a grim reminder of what I had lost. I'd throw it away eventually, maybe burn it, but for now it felt like the last piece of a long, brutal puzzle, finally falling into place. That weekend, I drove up to the old family cabin in the mountains. It had been years since I'd been there, but the memories came flooding back as I wound my way up the familiar, winding road. My grandparents had built the place themselves, long before my father turned the family into a small empire of real estate and investments. It was their legacy. Simple, honest, untouched by my father's cold ambition. When I pulled up, the cabin was still standing, a little rough around the edges, but solid, its weathered wood blending into the dense pines around it. I pushed open the creaky door, the scent of pine and old leather flooding my senses. Dust motes swirled in the slanting afternoon light, and the place felt like a forgotten part of my childhood, frozen in time. I spent the first day cleaning, sweeping out cobwebs, stacking firewood, scrubbing the old kitchen counter. I found my grandfather's old fishing rods still hanging on the wall, the tips slightly bent, the lines tangled and dry. I smiled, remembering those long, quiet mornings out on the lake, the mist rising around us as he taught me to cast. That night, as I sat by the crackling fire, an old quilt wrapped around my shoulders, I felt something shift inside me. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly free. No strings, no expectations, no one to please but myself. I pulled out my phone and considered sending my father one last message. Something short and final. Maybe even a little cutting. But then I stopped. What was the point? He made his decision, and so had I. Instead, I got up, opened the old screen door, and walked down to the lake. The moon hung low, reflecting off the dark, glassy water. The only sound, the gentle lapping of the waves against the shore. I took a deep breath, then threw my phone as far as I could, watching it spin through the cool night air before splashing into the deep, cold water. I stood there for a long time, watching the ripple spread and slowly fade into the calm, dark surface. It felt like a fitting end, a small final rebellion against the grip my father had held on my life for so long. As I walked back to the cabin, the nighter crisp and cool against my skin, I felt a strange, powerful peace settle over me. I had no idea what the future held, but for the first time in years, it felt like it truly belonged to me. A few months after my last break from the family, I'd settled into a quiet, satisfying routine at the cabin. I'd taken up fly fishing again, rebuilt the old dock, and even started a small vegetable garden. My life had become simple, almost peaceful. Then one chilly October morning, I found a letter in the old metal mailbox at the end of the gravel drive. It was the first piece of mail I'd received since I cut myself off from my father. I hesitated before opening it, half expecting another angry note from him or a desperate plea from Khloe, but it wasn't from them. The return address was from a small law firm I didn't recognize. Inside was a one-page letter neatly typed with a bold header that made my heart skip a beat. Notice of inheritance. Apparently, my grandfather had left me something in his will, a detail that had somehow slipped through the cracks when my father took control of the family estate. It was a piece of land, small, barely a few acres, but nestled on the edge of a mountain stream a few miles from the cabin. As I read the letter, I realized that my grandfather had quietly set this land aside for me, carving it out of the main estate before my father could get his hands on it. It was his way of making sure I would always have a place to call my own. No matter what happened to the rest of the family, I looked out at the mist-shrouded lake, the morning sun just starting to burn through the mist, and felt a strange, unexpected warmth in my chest. It seemed that even in the end, my grandfather had found a way to look out for me.